This happened about a year ago, and I've only told a few people about it, but for some reason, I found myself thinking back to it a lot lately. I was walking home from Walmart. It was close to 10 p.m. Our town is tiny and uneventful, and every establishment, apart from the couple of 24-hour convenience stores, close at no later than 11 p.m. So usually, at this hour, there aren't very many people out. That night, however, as I was walking, I suddenly heard what sounded like a man and a woman yelling. It was coming from a parking lot a little ways up in the direction I was walking. I couldn't make out anything that was being said yet, due to still being a relative distance away, and I initially presumed it to be an average verbal dispute. As I got closer, though, I quickly realized it was far more serious than a mere lover's spat. The man was repeatedly shouting threats and derogatory obscenities at the woman at the top of his lungs, and the woman in turn was screaming at him in an extremely anguished tone to leave her alone. I had no doubt that the man was attempting to harm the woman, if he hadn't already done so, and quickly dialed 911. By this time, I was close enough to the parking lot where I could be seen by them if they happened to look in my direction. So while on the phone, I kept my voice down and tried to outwardly mimic the body language of being in a casual phone conversation. This guy undoubtedly came across as the retaliatory sort, and if he knew that I was calling the cops on him, I could be his next target. Because their screaming continued during the phone call, the dispatcher heard it and rightfully picked up on how serious the situation was. I described my location to them as concisely as I could, and within minutes, 2 police vehicles arrived. One was a van and the other was a standard squad car. In the time between the phone calls and the cops arriving, the people had walked away from the parking lot that they were initially in and crossed to the other side of the street and began walking towards another parking lot a short ways down in the other direction. When they reached the point of being directly across from me, the woman looked at me, made eye contact, and pleaded, "Call the cops." I gave her a quick, subtle nod and made a slight, quick gesture with the phone in my hand to assure her that I was doing exactly that. She seemed to get the hint, because immediately after I did that, she screamed, "Your ass is going to jail," at the man. It turns out that the other parking lot that they were headed towards was where the woman's vehicle was, and she had been trying to make her way to it, but the man kept following her. This parking lot was where the cops met up with them. I, of course, continued to stay at a safe distance on the sidewalk that I was already on the other side of the street. The cops first interrogated the man, who loudly argued with them and tried to play off the situation as a heated verbal dispute. With how much he raised his voice, I could make out most of what he said, even at the distance I was at, and he essentially claimed that he had recently broken up with her for cheating on him, and that she kept following him. I stood there thinking, this is such BS. I hope the cops see through it. There were 3 officers on the scene in total, and 2 of them stayed with the man, while the third went over and talked to the woman. She spoke much more softly, so I could not hear what she told them, but apparently it was very damning, because the next thing I saw was the man getting cuffed and put into the police van, which then drove off. My guess would be that he was being taken in for questioning, at the very least. After the third officer finished talking to the woman, she was able to get in her vehicle and drive away safely. This assured me that at the very least, she was in stable enough condition to drive steadily, which I was relieved about. After she left, the third officer walked over to me and asked if I was the one who had called them. I confirmed that I was. He asked me a few more questions, such as if I know either of the people personally. I did not, and any other details I could recall, and then took down my info for records. I remember continually thinking to myself that I very likely saved that woman from being severely harmed, or possibly even saved her life. Like I said earlier, few people were out at that hour in our town, and if I hadn't happened to be walking home from Walmart at that moment, who knows if there would have been anyone else around to intervene. I've not encountered the man since this incident, thankfully. I sincerely hope the woman was also able to stay safe from him and is in a better place in her life these days. My family owns a boutique in a very big city here in the south. Our boutique is located in a very wealthy neighborhood, but that doesn't say much. If you go not even a mile north, south, west, or east, you'll enter rough areas of the city. With that being said, we have a lot of homeless, drug addicts, and sketchy people in general come to our stores. When these people come in, we are also nice, respectful, and treat them like we would our normal customers. We try not to judge by their appearances. However, we don't tolerate the begging, stealing, or soliciting. So, we've all had our share of weird encounters at our store. However, I think my most recent encounter was the creepiest. Last week, getting ready to close, I was tidying up the store when a woman came in. I greeted her as normal, and everything seemed smooth sailing. She was looking around and engaging in conversation about some of our pieces, when all of a sudden, things changed, quickly. The vibe and feeling of the room just felt eerie, so I moved behind the counter just to create a barrier. She began by grabbing one of our candles that has the saying, "I love you to the moon and back," across the front. I think this is what originally triggered her. She began talking about her family and how she would read the book, "I Love You to the Moon and Back," to her triplets that she didn't know she even had. She then started telling me about her life being married to Ryan Gosling and how she recently killed him because he kept poisoning her and hiding her 3 sets of triplets and daughter from her. At this point, I was just listening. I didn't want to upset her any more than she already was. When she finished, she began walking the store again, telling me about how she just got out of jail for stabbing someone. And at this point, she gets about 4 feet from my counter and tilts her head, looks me in the eyes, and says,
"I really feel like chopping you up right now."
We were the only 2 in the store at the time, and I was in shock. I had no clue what was about to happen. Up until then, she was just rambling. This was the first incidence of her showing aggression. Luckily, seconds after that statement, another customer, one of my regulars, came in, and the woman, who just told me she wanted to chop me up, grabbed her stuff and walked out the door. My regular could feel the tension as I rushed behind her and locked us in the store. So, lady who wants to chop me up, let's not meet ever again. So this is a story from many years ago, but I still remember it as if it were yesterday. I was a student and I played volleyball in a college team. One day, we had a very late match quite a distance away from where he lived. Us all being students and almost none having cars, it was quite a challenge to get there and back. I could drive along with the coach, a male student some years older than me. Everything went great until we went back. The coach lived about 2 miles away from me, and he thought it was just fine to drop me off at his address and let me walk home alone. By then, it was past midnight. They assured me I was going to be fine, so I started walking. It was a well-lit road with flats on the right-hand side and a cemetery and trees on the other side. There was no traffic. About halfway, a white car approached me and slowed down the moment the driver noticed me. My heart jumped immediately, but I told myself I was seeing things, so I went on. A few minutes later, the same car drove from the back, very slowly. I saw the car checking me out, and I totally freaked. The car drove on and turned into a sideway. I ran towards the nearest flat and hid behind the wall and waited. And yes, after a few minutes, the same white car came back again, driving very slowly where he expected me to be. But as I was hidden, he couldn't see me, and he sped off. I was terrified by then and was contemplating my options. The flat where I was completely dark, but the next flat had one window where I could see the light burning. I figured that would be my best option. There were no cell phones back then. Yes, I'm that old. I decided to run as fast as I could to the apartment with the lights on. I was in tears by that time and shaking from top to toe. I rang the doorbell, but no one answered. I rang again, and now someone looked out the window. A middle-aged woman looked down on me, and she looked startled. She opened her window a little bit and asked what I wanted. I rattled about what just happened and begged her if I could just use her phone to call my boyfriend. She reluctantly agreed and handed me her phone through the window gap, making sure I couldn't enter. She was obviously freaked out as well. I called my boyfriend, but he didn't pick up. He probably was already asleep. I was shaking and crying, and the white car came passing by again. The woman saw me freaking out and then decided that I was no threat to her, and she invited me inside. She gave me something to drink and gave me some time to calm my nerves. After a while, she offered to drive me home, and I happily accepted. She dropped me off right in front of my apartment and made sure I got in safely. Of course, the next day I paid her a visit. I brought her some gifts and profusely thanked her. She told me how spooked she was herself, but that she was glad that she could help. About a week later, it was on the local news that a guy was arrested who had raped several women that he picked up in his white car.